Hey guys, Will here, welcome back to the channel. Now today's video we're going to be looking at smartphones, and more specifically cheap smartphones, and I'm talking really cheap smartphones, like $100, $200 kind of cheap smartphones. So historically I've always been a user of very high-end flagship devices. I've always had the latest iPhones, I've always had the latest Android phones, and a lot of that comes from working in that industry for a very long time. I actually worked in Sony's corporate head office in Australia for, what was it, 5 or 6 years as a product specialist there. So I always had access to the latest and greatest devices and stuff like that, and I've always had a passion for the latest technologies. I've always been driven to want to have the most expensive and nicest and fully featured products available, whether I really needed those features or not. So because of that background, a lot of friends ask me a lot of the time whether they need to spend a lot of money on an expensive smartphone or tablet, and what they're actually going to be getting for that money, and do they need to be spending a lot of money to get a good experience, or is it really just niceties once you get over a certain price threshold? And what exactly is that price threshold of nice to haves versus necessities? So today we're going to be taking a deeper dive into this question to see exactly what you get for your money with a cheap smartphone. Now I'm talking absolutely insanely cheap. We're talking a phone which actually costs less money than a case for your iPhone XS. So we're talking around the sort of $150 Australian mark, which is sort of around the $100 US mark. So the phone that we're going to be taking a look at is the Lenovo A5 Android smartphone. So first of all, we'll take a look at the technical specifications and see exactly what you're getting for your money on paper. And then we'll jump in a little bit further and see what it's actually like from a user perspective, what the camera's like, whether it's laggy, what sort of benchmarking scores are, and whether it's actually something that you would want to use as a day-to-day phone as a replacement for something that's going to cost you a lot more money. So if that's something that you're interested to learn more about, stick around and we'll get stuck into it. Alright, so starting off with the technical specifications, I think it's probably the best place to start so we can go through all of the technical features of the phone, resolution and stuff like that. So you can see there straight away the price at the moment, 125 AU. Normally it's, well, they're saying here normally it's $172.53, but every time I've looked at it, it's been between about 125, 150 bucks. They've always got some sort of a discount going on, so that is all good. But let's scroll down to the technical specs here. So it's unlocked for worldwide use, so it's not locked to any particular carrier. It's also a dual SIM system as well, so you can actually put 2 SIM cards in there, which is great. So the key features here that we're interested in are a 5.45 inch display, 1440 by 720 pixel resolution. So it's not the highest resolution screen. It's obviously not the 4K resolution that we're used to seeing on really high-end devices, but as you'll see later on in the video, the picture quality is still actually pretty good. And I didn't actually find that I missed that crazy high resolution all that much as I thought I would anyway. So CPU wise, we've got a quad core 1.5 gigahertz MT6739 CPU, which is adequate. Then we've got Android 8.1, so it is actually running the latest version of Android. Now, I don't know how we would go in terms of software updates later on down the line. That's something that we'll have to come back and look at later on. I don't know what the ongoing support is like for these cheap devices. RAM and ROM, we've got 3 gigabytes of RAM, which is definitely respectable, and then 16 gigabytes of onboard storage. So not a whole lot of onboard storage there, but it does have an expansion slot for a micro SD card as well. So you can see down here, micro SD card compatible as well. And if we move down to the hardware here, you can see here it does actually support up to a 256 gigabyte storage card as well, micro SD card. So there's no concerns there in terms of storage overall. You can ultimately get as much storage as you get in a 256 gig iPhone, so that is fine. So bearing in mind that a 256 gigabyte SD card is going to cost you pretty much more than what the phone costs, you can upgrade the storage if you need to. So 1.5 gigahertz quad core processor, 16 gigabytes of onboard storage or ROM, 3 gigabytes of RAM, which is definitely respectable. Then we move down to the network. So it supports 2G or 3G wireless networks as well as 4G. All the standard sort of networks that you would see, so LTE, CDMA, everything. And as I mentioned before, it is a dual SIM system as well. Also supports Wi-Fi B, G, and N. And I haven't had any problems at all with the Wi-Fi connectivity. It's nice and quick and snappy, and there's no noticeable difference in speed between it and my iPhone X, which is nice. Again, looking at the resolution, 1440 by 720, as we mentioned before. You can see here as well, it's an LTPS type display, which is low temperature polysilicon, which means it's a little quicker to respond than your conventional LCD. Although most phones these days are either using LTPS panels or OLED screens. So not really, I wouldn't say it's a selling point, but it's nice to see that they haven't exactly skimped out on, you know, a really, really cheap quality display. Camera-wise, autofocus is supported, 13 megapixel rear camera. It's got face beauty, face detection, panorama shots for, you know, your various filters and things like that, but we'll get more into that later on. It does have a flash on the rear. A front camera is an 8 megapixel, which is respectable, touch focus, and it does support video recording as well, but we'll get into that a little bit later on as well. Media formats, it plays all of your regular type video files, MP3s, JPEGs, H.264, H.263 video formats as well, so there's no compatibility issues there at all. And battery-wise, 3,920 milliamp hour, which is definitely respectable, and I'm expecting that the battery life on this device is going to be quite respectable, but we will get into that a little bit later on as well. So moving on to what's in the box, and you can see here, just interestingly, I've chucked it next to my iPhone 10 box there, just to show you how identical the packaging is, even just the labeling on the side and everything. Very, very, very similar. That was the iPhone there, and the you can see I've never even used my headphones, and then the Lenovo on this side. But yeah, very, very, very similar packaging. But anyway, we'll move this one aside here because it's not really relevant to the video, but I just wanted to show you because I thought it was interesting that they pretty much copied Apple's design rather than coming up with something on their own. But yeah, so phones here, obviously normally it would be inside this little package with the screen protector and stuff on it there, or not really a screen protector, but rather just like a, you know, a little protective cover there to stop it from getting damaged in transport. But move that aside, and look, basically beneath that you've got a little quick start guide, very, very simple. Then you've got your little SIM removal tool, which we're going to use later on, so I'll pop that out as well. We've got a USB micro USB cable, so decent length there as well. It's probably about 1 meter long, which is good. And it's a decent quality cable as well. It's not super flimsy or anything like that. Now, one interesting thing is it does come with a international plug on it there. Now, I did notice on the GearBest website, they do actually state that they ship these products with the appropriate plug to suit the region that it's shipping to. Definitely not actually the case, because I obviously live in Australia and this is not an Australian plug, so not a big deal, because obviously because it's a USB plug you can just plug it into another charger that you'll have laying around from another device or whatever. But if it's the only phone that you've got, you are going to either have to fork out for a different charging plug or a adapter plug. An adapter plug is usually about 10-20 bucks, something like that, for a decent quality one. And a power adapter is usually sort of 20-30 bucks. So yeah, you're looking at $20-30 on top of the cost of the phone to get the right plug if you need one. But yeah, look, not a big deal. Most people have spare chargers laying around anyway, so I definitely wouldn't see that as being a deal breaker, but just something to be aware of. Okay, so on to the phone itself. Now, I've been using this phone for about 1.5 weeks now as my daily driver, just getting a good feel for it to sort of see, you know, what its ins and outs are and what it's like to use as a daily driver, because specs and all that sort of thing, you know, they tell you a part of the story, but what's it really like to use is probably the more important question. So the first thing I've noticed is, and you'll notice here, is I've got a really nice clean screen on the phone here. Now, I've found that this phone is an absolute fingerprint magnet. It doesn't have the oleophobic coating that you would normally find on a more expensive phone. And what that means is that as you use it, it does build up a lot of fingerprints. Now, I'm not going to deliberately smear it for you now, but what we'll do is we'll continue using it throughout this video just for the next section, and you'll see how fingerprinty the screen becomes just in the course of actually filming this. But it feels quite grippy when you're using it as well. Now, that could very easily be fixed by putting your own oleophobic coating on it. You can buy products that do that very, very cheaply, but you know, we don't want to spend any money on this thing. We want to show you what it's like out of the box. Another thing that I've noticed as well is that it is difficult to find good quality screen protectors for these devices, simply because they're not super common, at least here in Australia anyway. So that's something to just keep in mind. But look, overall the construction is very good. It doesn't obviously feel like an expensive device, but it doesn't feel like a super cheap device either. The backing is not horrible. I'll just peel off this sticker here as well. I've actually left that on there for now, but we don't need that on there anymore. Peel that off. But yeah, look, I mean, it's plasticky, but it's not squishy or anything like that. It doesn't feel cheap. it just doesn't feel expensive. You can see there is a fingerprint sensor there, and that's one thing that I've been really impressed with, is that does actually activate very quickly. You can see we've got our camera and flash as well. We've got a microphone at the top. We've got a headphone jack at the top there as well, something that Apple doesn't have anymore. And then we've got our microphone at the bottom and our micro USB connection as well. So very simple design. 3 buttons on the side. We've got our power button there, and then our volume up and down buttons there as well. And then on this side, we've got our SIM tray. Now, I'm just going to quickly show you the SIM tray first, because this is actually pretty cool. So we'll put in our little key here and pop that out. And you'll see here, we've got 3 slots. So we've got 2 SIM cards, and then a micro SD card slot as well. So pretty cool. You can have 2 SIM cards, one for each girlfriend, one for work, one for pleasure, whatever floats your boat there. But it is a handy feature to have, so that you can not have to carry multiple devices around on you at all times. So one thing I have been really impressed with is how effective the fingerprint sensor is on this. It's actually a lot better than the fingerprint sensor was on my iPhone 6S from a couple of years ago. And I actually prefer this to the Face ID on the current iPhone as well, because I find, you know, obviously unless you're looking directly at the device, it won't unlock it for you. Whereas with this, you just kind of touch it as you pick it up and it does everything. So we'll quickly show you that now. So we'll tilt it so you can see the screen, and you'll see I'll just touch the back and it unlocks. And you saw how quick that was. I'll just show you once more. So we'll go on 3. So ready, 1, 2, 3. And it's unlocked. So that is pretty cool. I'm pretty impressed with that. That works really effectively. And just the same as with all Android devices these days, you can set multiple fingerprints, that sort of thing. So in terms of the home screen, pretty much what you would expect. You've got your basic screens there with all your apps. The only app that I've actually got installed there is Antutu Benchmark. Everything else is just as it is, straight out of the box. So, you know, the usual Android experience here. Now, one thing you will notice is it is a little laggy. And this is a pretty typical experience here. Now, the lag comes down to 2 things. It's the you know, it's the speed of the content actually downloading from the internet, and that's, you know, that's limited by the Wi-Fi speed in your house and things like that. You can see here with the articles loaded, it's not too laggy, but just tapping on articles and stuff. Obviously, the internet speed comes in as a factor here as well. But I find just generally scrolling in articles, it can get a little bit jerky sometimes, going through menus and quitting and going back and forth and stuff. It's not too bad, but it definitely feels laggy compared to a high-end device. But I mean, you kind of expect that. Again, it's, you know, it's only a very, very cheap phone, and for the money, it's very, very good. But, you know, going into things like the Play Store and stuff, it does take a bit of time to load. And you can see there, it's just a little bit notchy. It's not that fluid, smooth experience that you get with, say, an iPhone. So, you know, we compare it to the iPhone 10 next to it, which is obviously a very, very different device. But, you know, just see how smooth that is compared to this. Like, you know, it's not even in the same ballpark really, but, you know, that gives you the idea. So we'll move that away again quickly now. So in terms of the core functionality, the dialer application is pretty much as you would expect. You've got your contacts there, your dial pad, the usual kind of stuff that you'd expect with an Android device, nothing fancy there. Messages is the same. Basically, it's just a panel that comes up with all your messages, exactly as you would get on any other Android device, so no need to really go into detail there. In terms of settings and things like that, we'll jump in here. And it's interesting that they've kind of stolen all of the Apple logos from iOS. I don't really understand why they've done that, because, you know, obviously it's an Android device. Why try to mask it as something that it isn't? Why not just embrace the fact that it's Android? So I don't really know why they've done that, but they have. So in terms of audio quality, I haven't had any problems with people speaking to me on the other side. Nobody's said to me that they can't hear me properly, and they haven't actually noticed that I changed phones. So that is a good sign. One thing that I have noticed in speakerphone mode is that the noise cancellation doesn't work quite as well as it does with other phones that I've used in the past. So you do get a little bit of an echo, and it can be a little bit difficult to hear people sometimes, especially compared to my iPhone 10, which is fantastic, and I always use that on speakerphone mode. So taking a look at the camera now, and you can see, once again, it's very much a clone of the iOS user experience, which again annoys me, but it is what it is. You scroll across, you've got a beauty mode, which is just like a post-processing adjustment that smooths skin and, you know, does all that kind of rubbish, which we're not really interested in, but, you know, some people might like that kind of stuff. You got your photo mode and then your video mode as well when you scroll over. So in photo mode, it's the framing is actually quite jerky, as you can see there. So as you move around, It's very, very, very slow. But I mean, because it's a still photo, it doesn't really matter. But if you were trying to do a tracking shot or try to, you know, capture a piece of action like somebody jumping or riding a bike or something, you might struggle with it. So tapping on different subject matter adjusts the exposure compensation. So tapping on different subject matter adjusts the brightness or exposure and the focus as well. So if we tap on, say, the yellow area of the speaker there, you can see everything drops down darker. And if we tap on a dark area, it lightens up again. If we tap here nice and close, you can see it will focus on the speaker. And then if we move over and tap on the car, it will focus on that. So going up to the top menu, there's a bunch of different options here for various different modes. So you've got panorama mode, a watermark mode, which allows you to have like a graphic that shows up on the screen, a time-lapse mode, which is pretty self-explanatory, beauty video, which is the same post-processing thing again as we mentioned before, and then pro mode, which is actually pretty cool. So you can adjust your white balance here, your ISO level, exposure, saturation, contrast, and brightness. The one thing that it doesn't have is a depth of field adjustment. Now, obviously high-end devices these days have a dual camera system that allows them to sort of cheat when it comes to depth of field. They'll have one image that's in focus and one that's out of focus, and they'll kind of interpolate between the two to create depth of field. We don't have anything like that on this camera, but having said that, the depth of field out of the box isn't too bad, as you'll see in just a moment. So we'll load up a couple of shots that we've taken for you quickly now, just to give you an idea of what it looks like. So this one's taken in bright sunlight with the Lenovo on the left and the iPhone on the right, and you can see the color reproduction in the iPhone is a lot more natural than the Lenovo is, but the detail inside the shadow area is where the biggest difference is. So obviously this is a high contrast photo because we've got a bright area in the direct sunlight and then we've got the shadow area behind the trees. So you can see the amount of detail that's retained in the iPhone photo versus the Lenovo photo. So this next one, there's a lot less difference in, but again, there's a little bit more detail in the shadows of the iPhone. This is just in natural sort of sunlight coming in through a window, hitting a Christmas tree indoors. So not a whole lot between these two, and I think that's sort of what you would deem as an acceptable photo from the Lenovo. Again, inside as well, same kind of idea, but this time trying to show a bit of depth of field. And you can see there's not a whole lot of difference between the two photos, but again, the iPhone's slightly more natural color. Now, what we've done with all of these photos is we've actually left the camera on its completely natural settings straight out of the box. We haven't done any tweaking for white balance or anything like that, because I think this is the way the majority of people will shoot photos. They're not going to mess around with settings to try and get the best possible photo. They're just going to take the camera out and shoot straight away. So, I mean, this really comes down to personal preference, but you can see the difference between how the iPhone has handled the white balance versus the Lenovo. And it is kind of a warm light inside the house. So even though the Lenovo photo looks a little bit more white than the iPhone one does, the iPhone is actually a much more natural representation or realistic representation of what the situation actually looked like. So that's another relatively bright space with natural light coming in through a window. So now moving on to the next shot, and this is shot in my dark garage, and this is where you can really see a massive difference between the two phones. It was impossible to even get a shot in focus on the Lenovo inside my garage, and there was still a bit of natural light coming through, but it was quite dark, and you can see the photos all grainy because it's cranking up the ISO to try and capture as much light as possible, whereas the iPhone didn't have any problem here whatsoever. It still picked up a natural looking photo that was representative of the amount of light that was visible in the room. Moving on to a portrait style shot now, and you can see this one is probably the biggest difference. So again, similar position, natural light coming in through the window, but you can see in portrait mode on the iPhone, nice depth of field there that's simulated by the dual camera system, and a lot more light coming through as opposed to the Lenovo, which is not a very good shot whatsoever. And these were shot in exactly the same light as each other, a few seconds apart. So the Lenovo doesn't have a portrait mode, whereas the iPhone does. But I think, you know, the majority of people, if they're taking a portrait photo, they're going to use portrait mode if it's available. So I think that's a pretty fair comparison. So you can see big difference between the iPhone and the Lenovo there. So in well-lit, low contrast conditions, there's actually not as much difference as I thought there might be between the two cameras, but definitely in low light conditions where you've got depth of field and stuff like that, there's no comparison between the two. The iPhone absolutely walks all over the Lenovo. So moving on to video now. And you can see here, we've got two videos shot exactly the same. I was holding both phones at the same time. And again, the iPhone is a much more natural light than the Lenovo is. I've slowed it down here as well so we can just sort of see a bit more of the detail that's going on. In terms of resolution, obviously the iPhone shoots much higher resolution than the Lenovo does as well with its 4K resolution. I don't think the majority of people actually use that though, but in terms of the actual color reproduction, again, the iPhone is much more natural and you've got a lot more detail inside the shadows as well. Even in a even in a well-lit situation like this. So moving into the garage now, and you can see the transition between going from light to dark. So you can see here the iPhone has a much more gradual compensation for the difference in light, whereas the Lenovo gets really, really dark, and then when the garage shuts and all the lights cut off, it suddenly snaps into brightness. There. So again, in low light conditions, just not a massive amount of difference in video, but you can just see there's a lot more detail in the iPhone, less graininess in general, and just an overall better quality image on the iPhone as opposed to the Lenovo. So the other thing to touch on quickly as well is just this quality of the actual display. Now the viewing angle is really, really fantastic on this. I'm actually really impressed by that. As you can see, as we tilt it, we don't lose any contrast or color. It all stays nice and vibrant. And although you do have a little bit of the sort of staircase effect on the edge of text due to the relatively low resolution compared to most high-end devices these days, it's really not that bad, and it's not that noticeable in day-to-day driving. If we load things like news articles up, you know, the text looks a little bit grainy, but it's not that bad. And I mean, when you pick up a high-end device with a higher resolution screen after using this device for a week or so, it is a bit like a breath of fresh air. But you know, having said that, day-to-day use, you don't really miss it. You don't really notice that the resolution isn't as good. I mean, because it's a relatively small screen, you don't need a super high resolution. And I feel like these days, resolution's gone a little bit crazy. You really don't need 4K on a screen this size. So overall, I've got to say, I think the display is probably what's impressed me the most about this device overall. The color's great. The resolution is definitely adequate, and I really can't fault it. For the money, I thought it was going to be a lot worse. So now we'll just quickly jump into Antutu benchmark for you as well. And we've previously run it because it did take a long time to run on this phone. I won't run you through the whole process now, but the end score that we got was 45,815. So comparing that score to other devices, our leader at the moment is the Huawei Mate 20 Pro, which is scoring 309,000. And then we got to scroll all the way down to the bottom, basically, to get to this phone, my device, which is 45,815. So, you know, we're looking at almost, you know, what is it, 8 to 10 times slower than a current flagship device. And I mean, looking at the devices that are sort of around it, the Vivo V9, the Zenfone 5, the Nova 3i, you know, and we start to, there's the LG G6 there at 152,000. So LG G6 is 3 times faster than this phone is. And yeah, so I mean, it doesn't paint a fantastic picture in terms of performance, but I mean, what we're really interested in, especially people that are looking for phones in this sort of price bracket, they're not looking at racing for benchmarking scores or anything like that. They just want something that is going to give them an adequate user experience. And I really do feel like this phone provides that. Despite the low benchmarking score, it's not actually that slow to use, and you really don't notice the lack of performance day to day until you pick up a high-end device, and then it becomes blatantly obvious. So, you know, if this is the only smartphone I'd ever used, I'd be completely happy with it. But then jumping across to a high-end device, you really do notice the difference. So the last important thing to cover is battery life. Now, I'm very happy to report that, and I'll jump into the menu quickly to show you how we've gone for this session since the last charge, but I'm very happy to report that generally speaking, I've been able to get around about a day and a half battery life out of it. So I can easily get through the day, plug it in at night, not have to worry about it. If anything, the battery life is actually a little bit better than the last few phones that I've had, simply because I think because the processor is a lot slower, it's not having to work as hard, and it's not driving that battery down. So as I mentioned at the start of the video, it's a 4,000 milliamp hour battery, and that is definitely more than adequate for this device. You can see here, 4 hours and 58 minutes ago, so 5 hours ago, I last charged the battery. We've had 4 hours of screen time, and we've run benchmarks and stuff like that in that time as well. And the battery's only down to 83%, and it's saying that we've got about a day and 17 hours left, which I think, you know, is probably a little bit on the overly ambitious side, but definitely I'm getting, you know, a day and a night, no problem at all, would be easily achievable with this. So yeah, battery life, I'm also very impressed with. Okay guys, so that's what you can expect from the Lenovo A5. Now, looking around at the technical specifications for phones around this price bracket, a lot of different brands make sacrifices in different areas. So some phones might have lower spec processors, or more RAM or less RAM, a high quality screen or a lower quality screen, higher resolution or low resolution, you know, things like that. So while this experience with this particular phone is pretty typical for the kind of experience you're going to get within this price range, it is important to look around and make sure that the phone that you're getting is suiting your needs best. So if you're needing something that's nice and snappy, in the menus and things like that, you might want to sacrifice a little bit of screen quality to get a slightly better quality processor or faster processor. Whereas if you're more into, you know, the camera side of things and visual quality, then that's probably what's going to be a little bit more important to you. So it is important to shop around and get the best thing that you can for your money, but I think that this phone is a pretty good indicator of the rough experience that you're going to get in this price range. So that is the Lenovo A5. Now, would I actually buy this phone as a daily driver? So look, for me, being so used to high-end devices that, you know, offer an instant experience where there's no lag, there's no waiting, everything just happens fluidly and instantly, I would have a really hard time moving away from that personally, because, you know, I find it frustrating. I'm using my phone a lot for work and things like that, and I really value having that smooth experience. And that's actually the reason why I originally moved from Android across to Apple 3 or 4 years ago now, is because I found with Android phones back then, often there'd be little glitches and things like that. Apps would crash and, you know, stuff like that. And it just annoyed me because I was so busy with my job at the time that I didn't have time to mess around with things. I needed something that just worked, and I was willing to pay a little bit more money to get that. And that's what Apple actually provided for me. But I've found that recently, with the more recent software upgrades and stuff like that that Apple have done, the user experience just isn't as fluid and as smooth as it used to be. And I think that Android really has closed the ground up again now, to the point where I would really consider choosing an Android phone again over an Apple phone the next time that I'm in the market for a new phone. But look, for me, I probably wouldn't go this cheap for my own personal use. If you're using it for something, you know, very specific, like, you know, just a work phone or something like that, or something that you want to give to your kids to have when they're going out, or, you know, a guest phone for when you've got people coming from overseas to, you know, to stay with you or something like that, then yeah, it's absolutely perfect. But, you know, for a daily driver, for somebody who's trying to run a business and things like that, you're probably going to want to spend a little bit more money. But look, I'm not negatively reviewing this phone, because you've got to put it in the context of how much this thing costs. And, you know, as I said at the start of the video, this phone costs less than a case for an iPhone XS, which is just insane. And when you're looking at what you're actually getting for your $100 or so, it really is incredible value for money. So it's a positive review overall for the phone, because I think it's fantastic value for money. But would I actually buy one as a daily driver for myself? Probably not. So look, I hope that helps answer the question as to whether a cheap Android smartphone is worth it. Yeah, look, they are absolutely worth it in terms of value for money. Would you actually want to daily drive one? Not so sure about that one. But look, if you want to have something that is as feature packed as possible, has all the latest security features as well, and want to spend as little amount of money as possible, then I would definitely recommend the Lenovo A5. So if you are interested in this particular phone, I do have an affiliate link in the description below where you can pick that up, and a small portion of the money from that also goes to helping out this channel, which is a great help for me. Helps me to put out more videos more frequently for you guys. Also, bear in mind as well that there is a Black Friday sale going on at the time of making this video as well, which takes a little bit extra off the price as well. So I think at the moment, last time I looked at it, was $125 Australian. Normally it's around the sort of 150 to 170 mark. So make sure you check that out as well. But for now, that's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you have found it useful, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button as well, and of course the notification bell so you don't miss the next video. Next up, we're going to be getting stuck back into my simulator, which you've probably noticed on my right hand side. So stick around. But that's it for now. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.